Hello there. My name is Dr. Chiron Wesley Graves, and I have Okoye here with me. And I'll tell you a little bit about Okoye in just a second. But first, I want to talk about the purpose for today's video. So, in this video, I want to talk about testcross, what it is, and when and why you would use a testcross. So a testcross basically is a tool that a geneticist, or in my case, a ball python breeder, would use to determine a genotype for a ball python or an individual when they have a dominant phenotype, but you're uncertain what the genotype for that individual is. And that very much is the case here with Okoye. So Okoye was the first ever ball python I produced. I produced her in 2018. So in July, she will be, quick math, 7 years old. Her father is Bingo, and her mother is Rhea. Now, neither one of these ball pythons have an albino phenotype. However, both of them are carriers for the albino trait. So both Bingo and Rhea are heterozygous for the TYR gene. And if we look at the Punnett square, or if we look at a Punnett square, looking at the probability of genotypes for offspring that Bingo and Rhea can produce, we will see that 2/3 of the individuals that have a wild type phenotype also have the possibility of having a heterozygous genotype for the TYR gene that leads to albinism in ball pythons. And as we can see looking at Okoye, she is very much wild type. So I have no idea so I don't know what her genotype is when it comes to the TYR gene. So I would do a test cross to determine what her genotype is for the TYR gene. Now, in order to do a test cross, what I would need to do is I would need to mate her with a male that has the recessive phenotype. In this particular case, we're looking for an albino male. Because that individual has an albino phenotype, that means that that individual would have a homozygous recessive genotype. Now let's talk about how a test cross would work in the case where you have an individual like Okoye whose genotype for a gene, in this case a TYR gene, we don't know, and we pair her with an individual like Mr. Pickles, whose genotype we do know, and that genotype is homozygous recessive. A test cross is a mating that occurs between an individual with an unknown genotype and an individual with a homozygous recessive genotype. The goal of a test cross is to figure out what the genotype of the unknown individual is, or to figure out the unknown genotype. And in my case, the individual with the unknown genotype is Okoye. And we're talking about the TYR gene in particular. Excuse me. And Okoye has a wild type phenotype, as we discussed earlier, but her genotype can be either homozygous or heterozygous. We're testing to figure out which of the two options this is. And to test which genotype she is, we're going to use Mr. Pickles, who has a homozygous recessive genotype for the TYR gene. So there are two possibilities or two possible outcomes from this test cross. Outcome one is occurs if Okoye is heterozygous. And if we look at the Punnett square, or if we look at the gametes that Okoye can produce as a heterozygous individual, she can either produce gametes that have the dominant allele or gametes that have the recessive allele. And then, of course, Mr. Pickles can only produce gametes that have the recessive allele. So what that results in is half the individuals will have a homozygous recessive genotype. And so 50% of those individuals will have an albino phenotype. And then the other half will have a heterozygous genotype, and they will have a wild type phenotype. Outcome number two features Okoye, or involves Okoye as a homozygous dominant individual. And if she is homozygous dominant, then there's only one possible gamete that she can form, and that is gametes that have the dominant allele. And when she's paired with Mr. Pickles, who can only form homozygous recessive, or can only form recessive alleles for his gametes, then what we see is all of the individuals will have a heterozygous genotype, and thus have a wild type phenotype. So either the offspring that Mr. Pickles and Okoye have will be 50% albino and 50% wild type, or they'll all be wild type. And that will help me determine what genotype Okoye has for the TYR gene. So that's how I would that's what a test cross is, and how I would use a test cross to confirm whether or not a ball python like Okoye, or a ball python in Okoye's situation or scenario, is either heterozygous for the TYR gene or homozygous dominant. And so I'm looking forward to testing her out with Mr. Pickles to confirm what genotype, or to determine what genotype she has. So if you're interested, make sure you follow the channel, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see you then.